After once in a generation property boom in 2020 and 21, it seems like the market is slowing down. Now, is Australia housing market now in the downturn? And many of us will probably ask, what is the outlook for Perth property market in 2023 and beyond? Good evening, everyone. Welcome to IQI Australia Friday Prop Talk. My name is Lee Yen, and I am your host this evening. Thank you for joining us this evening. Now, if you haven't, please subscribe to our IQI Australia YouTube channel, where you will get the latest video update from us. Okay, this evening, we are very excited to have Mr. Angus Murray with us, sharing his view on Perth property market in the next 5 years. A very interesting topic to many of our audience out there. So now let me do a quick introduction. Now, Angus is the CEO and the business owner of PRD. He has led PRD in Perth since 2003, offering project marketing and management services to both international and national, which is the local project developer or property developers, advising on site acquisition, design, product mix, project positioning, pricing, as well as marketing strategy. Now, Angus has over 20 years of experience in the real estate industry, and his local knowledge and expertise is invaluable to not just his client, but to a lot of people who has the opportunity to work alongside him or with him, like ourselves. Now, without further ado, join me welcome Angus.
Hi, Leanne. How are you? Thanks for having us on.
Good evening, Angus. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us this evening. So sorry about the technical difficulty. I think our line is a little bit unstable at the beginning, so hopefully we will not have any more hiccup throughout the session. Yeah. Now, Angus, we are experiencing a very interesting time in our property market at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the whole world economy is interesting at the moment, and Perth's no different. But we'll talk about that in detail. A lot of our clients are also interested, both developers and buyers, wondering what the future is going to be like, and we've got an opinion on that, and we're happy to share it.
Oh, thank you so much. And I am aware that you actually have done up a lovely presentation with a lot of information. So yeah, when you're ready, go ahead.
Okay, thanks very much, Leanne. Look, we are a fairly substantial player in the Perth apartment and house and land market. So we've been selling into this market and developing in this market for over 20 years. So we're very familiar with it. And so we're going to share with you a few of the things that you need to understand about the Perth market going forward and how maybe it differs from other parts of Australia. So I'm going to go through these presentation slides. What many of you will know is really the key to making money from real estate is about population growth. Obviously, location is what we've all been taught since we grew up. But population growth is critically important. And there's been big changes in that regard in Perth over the last 12 months or so. So Perth's come out of a bit of a downturn at the same time that Sydney and Melbourne were really booming. And that was because a lot of immigration from Asia and from Europe came into Sydney and Melbourne to study and also to work, because those states did the most to encourage people to come. And Western Australia was doing very little during that time. And we'll talk about immigration further in my presentation, but it's a very important part of the story going forward. Where we are right now, we've got a rental vacancy rate of 0.4%. So they say that full is about 3%, allowing for people who are moving between properties, that sort of thing. So there is virtually nowhere to rent in Perth at the moment. Rents have risen up to 20% in some areas over the last 12 months, and we're expecting that trend to continue for the next year. Eventually, rents will get to a point where they're not affordable for local people, and that's going to push more people to purchase. And it will also put a ceiling on rents. But we're thinking there's probably another 10 to 15% increase in rents over the next 12 months to 2 years. Why is this happening? Well, it's happening principally because Western Australia has the resources that a lot of the world is chasing, especially since the Russia and Ukraine war started, and a lot of countries in the Western world stopped buying what Russia provides. So that includes oil and gas and many of the other products that Western Australia produces, including wheat and other grains. So we have the resources. It seems in Western Australia we're so lucky. Every time the world needs something new, like lithium for electric car batteries, we didn't even know here 3 or 4 years ago that Western Australia had lithium. Now we find we've got over 30% of the world's resource. So this is starting to be produced. And so these industries are generating multi-billion-dollar projects which are constructed and operated in Western Australia. So the resources industry is really booming here in Western Australia now. Almost every week we hear of new billion-dollar projects being announced. And we haven't had that since about 2013, 2014, which was when we had the last boom in real estate in Western Australia. So West Australian real estate is very heavily tied to the resources industry, and the oil and gas guys and the iron ore guys, the lithium producers, they're all making a lot of money at the moment, and that filters down through the local economy. There are about 75,000 job vacancies in Western Australia. So with a population of the state of about 2.5 million, that's quite considerable. There's only about 35,000 unemployed. So there's around about 2 jobs available for every person who doesn't have a job. That is historic in Australia. No one has ever been in that position in Australia before. So getting a job is very easy. Most people are quite confident about their employment, and that helps them to spend, and it helps them to afford to pay the higher rents that they're currently having to pay. Construction costs have really risen considerably here during COVID. So a lot of countries around the world are experiencing inflation. Australia no different, with inflation currently running at about 6.5%. So lower than Europe and lower than the US, but still an issue that the government and our Reserve Bank would like to stamp out. Construction costs, we're hearing from builders, are coming off a little bit. They've certainly plateaued. We've certainly come to a top, and builders are telling us that they don't expect any more significant rise over the next 12 months or so. In fact, they expect costs to come down slightly. So they've come up 25%, and maybe 10% of that rise is going to come back off over the next 12 months. But we don't see construction costs ever returning back to what they were prior to COVID. So we're going to have to live with a higher cost environment for construction. Interest rates have been rising in most countries around the world now for the last 6 months. This came as a bit of a surprise in Australia. The Reserve Bank told us we weren't going to be seeing interest rate rises until 2024, and then they had to start earlier, 2 years earlier than they had told the public. And this was because inflation rose faster than they had predicted. Very interestingly for us, we've seen interest rates going up by 0.5% a month, and people were a bit concerned that at that speed they'd go too far. But in the last monthly meeting, the Reserve Bank of Australia, they tempered the rate rises from 0.5% down to 0.25, which we're taking as a signal that there's not that much further to go for interest rate rises in Australia before the Reserve Bank decides to pause and see what the impact is of the work that they've done. So you can borrow for an owner-occupier loan from one of the major banks in Perth now for around about 4.4% on a variable rate. And that's quite affordable for most Australians and still historically fairly low. We see that rising to around about 5% over the next 6 months, and then probably being steady at 5% for a couple of years. Maybe it'll reduce in 2024 and start to go back down. So 4.5%, 5%. Not bad for Australians. They've had a bit of a shock that we were being able to borrow at 2%, and that's no longer possible. So it's taking people a bit of time to get used to paying more. but we think that they can afford to pay a bit more. Rising rents are going to push them in that direction as well. It's not a cheaper option to go and rent a property at the moment. So we'll talk later about which locations will benefit most, and we'll have a discussion about whether now is a good time to buy or not in the Perth market. So this graph that I've put up now is a graph of quarterly population growth in Western Australia. And the most important thing you can see there is the light blue portion, actually, which was overseas migration. So you can see that overseas migration turned negative in Western Australia during COVID. So for a few years there, we've had very little population growth. And then you can see in the last quarter that's recorded here, which actually is the June quarter, that very strong interstate migration, which is the yellow, and then the light blue, also net overseas migration. So the migrants are coming back. We're expecting to see in the next couple of quarters that number increase to what you can see right over in the bar on the left-hand side of 2013, where we got up to around about 20,000 a quarter in population growth for Western Australia. So that's a very positive thing, and that's really going to drive the market. We're not in a position where there's a lot of stock available for people to where people can live, either in the rental market or to purchase. So that's going to factor into what you will buy. That and construction costs is a conversation that we're going to have during this session. So we talk about the immigration story, and so a lot of people don't understand that immigration policies are different from state to state in Australia. The federal government sets criteria and they put schemes in place, but the state governments can decide how many people they want to allow into their state and which of those schemes they want to participate in. So Western Australia 5 years ago opted out of a couple of really important schemes, the Skilled Migration List and Regional Migration Scheme. Earlier this year, they opted back into both of those schemes, and now they've dramatically increased them. So the Skilled Migration List of occupations in WA has been expanded from 2 to 286. And if you look at that list on the available websites, you'll see it includes almost every occupation you can think of. Now, if you come here to study, obviously a very popular thing for people from overseas to come to Australia and study, there used to be a working hour cap of 20 hours per week, and that has been completely removed. So students coming to Australia now can work as many hours each week as they like. And this has been a very popular thing with bringing students back to Australia post-COVID. So currently there's 10,000 student visa applications per week. Now, and I've mentioned there on the slide that there's a 1 million visa backlog. I actually wrote that a couple of weeks ago. And last weekend, the government announced that they've issued 2 million visas in the last 5 months into Australia, 2 million visas, and there's still a backlog of 900,000. So very large numbers of migrants and also backpackers and students coming into Australia. And obviously student visas are fairly easy to apply for. The breadth of things that you can study to get a visa to come into Australia is very wide. It's not necessarily just university students. There's a whole range of different study areas that people are coming in to enjoy. So we've got to think about this large number of people coming in. Where will they live? Usually they'll rent before they buy. Now, bear in mind that the visas obviously have to be issued before someone can make plans to come to Australia. So a lot of the 2 million visas issued in the last couple of months, a lot of those people won't have come to Australia yet. But when they come here, they're going to find that the rentals are really tight right across the country, and WA is no different to anywhere else, probably even tighter. So rents are rising. And it is difficult to even get to put an application in to find something to rent. So a lot of people are going to have to consider buying if they come to Australia in the next few months. Our view of it is that students coming will want to live in the city of Perth, or they will want to live where there's good public transport to their university or college of choice. So if it's students that you're thinking are going to be your tenants at your price range, then look for good public transport and also look for apartments right in the heart of the city. If it's going to be skilled workers who are probably coming with their families, then they're going to be looking to rent houses, probably in the outer suburbs. So there's a couple of options there, both going to be quite worthwhile, we think. So the rental vacancy rate, we're going to be reading a lot more in the press over the next year or two about a rental vacancy crisis in Australia. The governments here have really done a lot to disincentivise investors in the Australian market over the last few years. And they're paying for that now because there just simply are not enough rental properties. If you buy off the plan into Western Australia, you can now get a rebate of the local stamp duty and the foreign buyer's stamp duty of 50%. So that's really beneficial to be able to take advantage of that. Some of the apartment developers who are selling completed stock are also matching that scheme. So you should ask your IQI representative. They will know which developments are you're able to access those rebates of stamp duty. So the rental crisis is going to drive rents up. We don't think a lot of Australians are going to bounce into the rental investment market. They're watching interest rates rising. They're wondering about the security of their jobs. So I think for the next few months, we're going to see a little bit of a pause from the local market. And next year, we're feeling when the Reserve Bank comes out and says interest rates in Australia are at their peak, then I think we're going to see a lot of activity from local investors. So we see that happening in the back half of next year. The government have predicted that we need 60,000 new dwellings in Western Australia over the next 4 years. So that's more than we can actually build. So the shortage is going to exist for some time. And when you consider the number of migrants and interstate migrants coming into Western Australia is expected to be about 20,000 a quarter, you can see we're going to soak up those 60,000 dwellings well and truly. We're involved in an apartment project in the Perth CBD, which IQI also sell for us. And in that particular building, rents for one-bedroom apartments are up by 32% in the last 12 months. So that building has been particularly popular because it's right in the heart of the city, and it's been popular with students and professionals. Excuse me. Student accommodation at University of Western Australia, one of our biggest universities, now over $500 per week, and we're hearing that student accommodation is full. So if you're planning on sending your kids to Australia to study, you need to be careful to look at what student accommodation is available or strata title apartments. A lot of the Perth developers in the last couple of years have focused on the downsizer market. So that's local Aussies who are going from a 3 or 4 bedroom house to an apartment. And so they've focused on the bigger apartments, the more expensive apartments with the river views. And we're thinking now that the developers are going to have to change that focus. They're really now going to have to look at the market for migrants that are coming into the state. We see less demand in the next couple of years from downsizers and a much greater demand from people coming to WA for the first time. I talked a little before about the resources and the infrastructure boom that's happening in WA at the moment. It's really hard to get your head around the size of the West Australian resource projects. And I'm not going to run right through this list, but Woodside Petroleum, who are now one of the top 10 oil and gas producers in the world, are a West Australian company. And they've got a project called Pluto and another one called Browse. Pluto is already under construction. Browse will be starting in the next 12 months. There's $36 billion worth of development just between those two projects. Each of them will employ about 4,500 people during construction. And Woodside have told us that they're expecting to bring 100% of those workers in from outside of Western Australia. So, so all of those people are going to be new arrivals into the state to come and work on those projects. Going forward, one of the interesting things that we're all keeping a very close watch on is that there's a big shift to green energy, and the major green energy consideration in WA is hydrogen. Interestingly, hydrogen is made from water. You split water into oxygen and hydrogen. Two gases form water. Don't ask me how, but that's how it works. And hydrogen can then be used for energy production and shipped around the world, much the same as we ship LNG at the present time. The construction in the north of Western Australia has just started from a company called Engie, a French company. They're in business with another company called Yara, and also Mitsui, a big engineering firm from Japan. It's only a $100 million project, fairly small for West Australian standards, but this is a trial project, and coming off the back of this trial project are 3 separate $100 billion energy hubs. And so it's a very, very important trial. The state and federal governments of Australia are heavily involved in trying to make sure of the success of this project. I've shown on a plan there of the Pilbara. You can see in the centre of it, if you can just read it, the town of Karratha. The state government has set aside to the north, to the right-hand side of that graph, an area 200 kilometres long and 10 kilometres wide for wind and solar farms. And to the south, to the other side, to the left-hand side of that map, an identical sized area. So 400 kilometres long in total by 10 kilometres wide to be covered in a wind farm and solar farm to drive the hydrogen industry. So this is going to be huge. A lot of the energy is going to be exported into Asia from these developments. So we see the energy business in Western Australia being driven forward for the next 50 years at least. It's going to be a very important trade here. I've gone through this before. If you're looking for work in WA, it's pretty simple. There's 45,000 unemployed at the time I wrote this, 70,000 job vacancies now. That's increased to 75, and the number of unemployed has reduced. So no problems finding work here. Part-time work in cafes and restaurants and the like also plentifully available. Almost every business in Western Australia that you speak to is currently struggling to find enough workers. So people coming into Western Australia in the next 12 months are going to have no difficulty finding work whatsoever. Construction costs. So this is a concern for a lot of people. What's happening with construction costs? Are we going to be able to afford to build apartment buildings and things going forward? And certainly that's been causing some issues in Perth in the last 6 to 12 months. And I put a couple of graphs up here to see that to show you that the worst has passed. So the left-hand graph is the oil price, which it was up around $120, $130 a barrel, and now running at about $90 a barrel. And the same for steel rebar, which is in the middle. It's used for construction of apartment buildings and also houses in the suburbs. So you can see also that spiked up in 2021 and has now come right back down to very much close to the prices back in 2019. And on the right-hand side, I've got a graph there of the World Container Index. So this is an index that tracks the cost of shipping containers around the world. And you can see that it peaked up around $12,000 US, and it's now down to around about $4,500, $5,000 US. Pre-COVID, that was around about $2,500. So still around about double the cost of freight pre-COVID, but coming down, as you can see. So freight costs will keep dropping as the US market slows and there's less exports from China to the US and to Europe. So we're expecting all of these cost inputs into construction to keep coming down, and there will be a lag, there'll be a delay from when these costs come off to when you see that in the reduced cost of building a home or building an apartment in Perth of probably 6 to 12 months. So we're confident that the construction costs will come down a bit, at least certainly be easier to control. Here's the evidence that we're showing you for that, so you can understand why we've come to that view. Interest rates. This is what is on everybody's lips in Australia at the moment. Everyone's concerned, are they going to be able to afford their repayments? It's very different across Australia. So to give you an idea, in Sydney, the average mortgage is over $1 million. In Perth, the average mortgage is around $450,000. So we have half the size of mortgage to what they have in Sydney. The average income, household income in Perth, is the same as that in Sydney, and more than Melbourne. So they have much, much higher repayments and the same income as we have in Perth. So Perth is much better positioned to deal with increasing interest rates. Nobody likes it. No one's going to enjoy it. It does impact upon consumer confidence, but the reality is they're not going to get into too much trouble. So our view is that the Sydney and Melbourne markets have got further to fall, that they are unaffordable, that people are going to really struggle in the outer suburbs, especially with the mortgage payments they've got to make. We see less trouble in the years ahead in the inner city in Sydney and Melbourne, because the number of students and migrants that will come back into those markets will keep the apartment markets reasonably buoyant. But the higher end house prices and the prices of houses out in the mortgage belt suburbs are going to suffer in those cities, certainly more than will happen in Perth. The Reserve Bank of Australia has one objective: to keep inflation within a 2 to 3% range. At the time of writing this, it was 6.1% and rising slowly. So at the moment, we've got a 2.35% Reserve Bank interest rate, and we're expecting another couple of rises of about 0.25, so likely to get close to 3. It's being predicted by some in the markets that it might go to 3.5. So if you're currently paying 4.4% on a mortgage, maybe you're going to see something like 1% more than that before it starts to fall. So the reality is the low interest rates of the COVID pandemic couldn't last forever. We all knew it had to come to an end, but still, nevertheless, people got a bit used to paying 2%. In Australia, we'd never ever seen that before. And in Melbourne and Sydney, they really bid the housing prices up enormously on the basis of those very low interest rates. This didn't happen in Perth. We had certainly prices rose 10 or 15%, but nothing like what went on in parts of Sydney and Melbourne. So there will be a correction. We don't see that correction impacting on Perth anywhere near as much. So where to invest and what to buy? This is what we all need to think carefully about. So our view of it is that population growth is the main driver. So you need population growth in a market in an overall sense before you participate in that market at all. If the population's shrinking or the growth is very low, then you can't expect to get great capital gains from your property purchase. So immigration in WA is what drives population growth, and we've got that now. What happens politically in Australia is sometimes we get our policies wrong and we swing too far in one direction, and that happened in WA when we really restricted immigration for 5 years. But eventually you get to the point where you've completely run out of workers, and you realise that you've made a mistake, and then the pendulum swings back the other way dramatically. And that's what we're seeing right now with very, very large numbers of people coming in. There's never been a better time than now for workers to come to Australia. And I think that that workers, especially through Asia, have realised that, and they're coming in large numbers. So students and skilled workers will be the largest inflow. The other large inflow will be backpackers, especially from Asia and Europe. And they're very important here because they will fill, they and the students will fill a lot of those short-term casual jobs in the food and beverage industry and the hotel industry. And we're very, very short of workers in that area, in those areas. So the city and public transport, water views, we think are always important in Australia. If you can find property where you can get good water views, that will always reward you with higher capital gains than if you purchase somewhere where you can't see the water. But being right in the heart of the city or close to good public transport, two key things to look for. As I've said before, students are going to prefer apartments and skilled workers are going to prefer houses. So you can't go too far wrong there. I would still stick, however, to city and public transport and water as being my three main criteria. Existing properties are going to be cheaper than new builds. And so there still are some developments around, and IQI know very well where those are, where you can purchase properties at yesterday's price because the builders have completed the buildings. They're not having to incur the much higher construction costs that we're all seeing today. So you can buy at yesterday's price with an existing new property, and that's very much our advice. But those opportunities are rapidly running out now. In one development we're involved in the city, there's now only something like 30 apartments left in a building that's been very, very popular. So if you want to buy something brand spanking new, then I would be quick about it. Once they're gone, there's not going to be any alternative. If you're buying off the plan, you are going to have to pay more, and that's simply because it's costing the developer significantly more to build the building for you. So the one benefit of buying off the plan, obviously you get a wider range of choice, but you are also going to get the 50% stamp duty rebate that the government offers, which is aimed at promoting new construction and increasing the supply. The only other advice I'd give you is if you're borrowing money to buy into the real estate market in Australia at the moment, don't overextend yourself. Interest rates are going to go up a little bit more, and you don't want to find yourself in a position where you've overborrowed and that's causing you stress. So property investment should be fun, and the key to that is following good advice, speaking to trustworthy people like the people from IQI, and don't go beyond your budget. So is it the right time to buy? So my view is that the Perth population is going to increase quite dramatically over the next 5 years. We had a 5-year period running up to about 2015 where the population of Perth jumped by 500,000 people in a few short years. And my view, that's going to happen to us again. We're going to see another 500,000 people mainly coming to live in Perth. And that's going to be dramatic. We certainly don't have enough accommodation, and that means that prices are going to have to go up to drive a greater supply. So big population increase coming, and that's really going to be good for the property industry. I don't see the world's demand for property, for resources in Western Australia going away anytime soon. One of the things we've learned recently is the world has not been able to replace coal and LNG with wind and solar power yet, and it's going to be quite some time before they're in a position to do so. In fact, I think the demand for energy around the world is rising faster than the construction of solar and wind and other new forms of energy. So iron ore and LNG, lithium, hydrogen, all of these major projects are going to underpin the West Australian economy for the next 5 years. Rental demand is going to be very strong. I just can't see how that won't be the case for at least 3-4 years. Big buildings take 3 or 4 years to plan and then build, and there's very little new stock being built in Perth at the present time. So it's quite difficult to get a new build out of the ground at present, and so there's just so many people coming in. The rental demand is going to continue to be strong. Higher construction costs can't be avoided for new builds. So the 25% that we've experienced over the last 18 months is going to subside a little bit. It's not going to go away completely. So if you're expecting new apartment prices or new house and land prices in Perth to go back to where they were before COVID, you're going to be disappointed. We are all, with inflation, going to have to get used to paying a bit more for things. It's a reality. Now, my view is that inflation, a bit of inflation, is actually a really good thing for owners of property. If you've got strong population flows and costs continue to rise by 3 or 4% a year over the long term, that has to eventually feed into the value of the property that you've purchased. So I'm not frightened about inflation, but we don't need to see it quite as high as it is at the present time. Interest rates are going to go higher, but the Reserve Bank of Australia have signalled that we're getting close to the top, and I don't think they're going to remain up there for all that long. The main areas of voting public in Australia are Sydney and Melbourne, and the voters and mortgage holders in Sydney and Melbourne are going to be hurt the most, and our government is going to be very sensitive to how the voters in Sydney and Melbourne are feeling, and we think that means that interest rates will come off pretty quickly. But we're not going to get back to 2%. Maybe we're going to get back to something like 4% long term. That's our current view. So choose your property carefully. By all means buy. I don't think you're going to get cheaper property in the next 5 years than what you can get in Perth today. So I'm buying. I'm not concerned about buying. I'm not concerned about recommending to people to buy. Danger signals, if there's something that you should look out for, it's just interest rates. The health of the Australian economy is very much in the hands of our Reserve Bank. If they continue to raise rates for too long, then that will hurt everyone. I don't see it happening, and I think it's a very, very good sign that they've actually reduced from 0.5% a month down to 0.25. But over the next couple of months, read about that, watch out for it wherever you see announcements from the Australian RBA. Read those carefully and understand what they're telling us about the next 6 months or so. So choose carefully, don't borrow more than you can afford. They're the best bit of advice that I can give you. Angus Murray, the CEO of PRD Real Estate, signing off. Good luck to you all.
Thank you so much, Angus. That was a really informative information for all our audience out there, and a really good advice as well. There's so many positive indicators out there that, we should do something. We got to do something, isn't it?
Absolutely, Leanne. Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think whether you're sending your kids over here to study, renting is not going to be the answer. It's very, very hard to find somewhere for you to live, and it's going to get more and more expensive. So for those people, the old adage of buying for your student child when they come to Australia and then selling a few years later, and the increase in value helping to pay some of the costs of studying in Australia, I think those times are back. That's going to be an important concept going forward.
Exactly. Even just keeping it as a long-term investment, and with the rental that sitting at that high and low vacancy rate, it's a good idea to keep it for long-term, and it's a freehold. So why not? And you are right. Recently, we do get a lot of inquiry from overseas parents that looking for rental because they couldn't get into the student housing at uni, or it's actually too expensive. So they're starting to contact us and see, is there any properties that they can rent? Even that, it's not happening. So they end up have to buy. It's probably end up cheaper to buy than rent.
Yeah.
So, like what you say.
So, Leanne, we manage a lot of properties, as you know, and recently we had one particular property in a well-known building in the city where we had 1,000 inquiries to rent that property when we advertised it. So we've had to limit the number of people that can come along to home opens for rental properties. You have to qualify now before you can even get an invitation to come to the home open. It's quite extraordinary.
I know, right? And people even actually beating for it, like, they're actually willing to pay more. So we don't
Yes,
want to see that
yes.
situation keep getting, uncomfortable. So we really need not just, parents buying for the children to live in, also the investor to come back to the market as well, isn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And
Well, one of the things I've noticed, Lee, and I've got a portfolio of properties myself, and
mm,
all of my rents have risen. I'm careful not to take advantage of the situation, but in
yeah.
every property that I have across Western Australia, the rents have risen quite substantially more
Yeah.
than the increase in my interest rates.
Mm,
So I'm not happy to be paying more interest to the bank, but I think a lot of West Australians also lock their interest rates in at quite low rates. And so that's going to protect them for the next couple of years as well.
mm. And not just the interest rate and tradies services and repair, that sort of thing, they all increase in price as well. To get a plumber out to fix your rental property, it's actually going to cost a little bit more as well. So yeah, sometimes landlord have
Yes.
no choice but to pass it on, isn't it? Yeah.
No, that's right. But we're finding now that if you work hard, you can find people who are prepared to give you a reasonable price for
Price.
work. So
Yeah.
that's changing a little bit. That's what over the next 6 months we expect that to change, where you will be able to get a reasonable price to get your plumbing fixed, where that hasn't been possible for the last 6 months. It's been very tough.
Yeah. No one will work. We're just, really running out
Yep.
of workers in Perth. Yeah.
Yes,
And
yes, yes.
And as you also mentioned about close to public transport, amenities, things like that. So I think you have touched on a good point. If you invest in an area that close to all the amenities and public transport, it can't go wrong. So yeah,
Absolutely, yeah, no, absolutely, and look, I think the inner city of Perth really we've proven with the NV building that IQI and PRD have both been involved in. The demand has been huge,
yeah,
and so the Perth inner city used to be quiet and sleepy and not that popular with renters and investors 5, 6, 7 years ago, but that's
yeah,
all completely changed. So I think
exactly.
the inner city is going to be a good place, whereas maybe Melbourne, where there's been enormous development in the inner city apartment business, it's a bit tougher. There's just so much stock. But
Mm,
in the Perth inner city market, I think there's a lot less stock, and it's becoming a more popular place for young people to live.
exactly. Especially when we bring in ECU and looking at extra
Yes,
10,000 people working and living in the city, we definitely need lots more accommodation in the city center. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
And you are right, in terms of pricing, we are almost half price of the Sydney CBD at the moment. And you probably have heard that recently we just have one investor came over from Sydney, bought one of the properties in NV. And when
Yes,
he found out the price, he was like, "This is unbelievable, half price of Sydney." So
yes, 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 yeah. No, look, I think that's important from two things, Leanne. Like, I think it shows that there's upside, but
mm,
I think it also shows that you've got some downside protection. Prices can't fall really in Perth because you're in that particular building that we're talking about. You can't replace it anymore
correct.
for that price. It's not able to be. The price is below replacement cost.
Mm,
Whereas in Sydney, I think it's very different. There is still room for properties to fall. Not
mm,
really the case in the Perth market.
yeah.
We see the prices here being flat to slightly up in the next 12 months, where maybe
Mm.
in Sydney and Melbourne, it might be another 10% down.
Mm. And you just bring out that key point there, Angus. Even though it's Australia, but each state have their own property cycle. They all perform quite differently, isn't it? I find
Yes,
it, yeah, quite often that people
absolutely.
when they
Look,
read things, mm,
10 years ago, you could look at Australia as one market, but
yes,
you can't anymore, and that's why you've got to talk to local professionals in each city. If you're wanting
mm,
to invest in Perth, you've got to talk to somebody who really understands the local market. Very dangerous to have someone in Sydney or Melbourne telling you what you need to do to buy in Perth. You need you
correct,
need to find a trusted professional in your local market. That's really important.
exactly right. Yeah. And Angus, you also mentioned about the stamp duty rebate that the WA government is offering at the moment. And it is ending in October 2023. Just,
Yes,
in your point
yes.
of view, there's no right or wrong. What do you think? Do you think they are going to extend it or
Yeah. Look,
we will?
Leanne, one of the things I do when I get frustrated is I write to the state premier and the state treasurer, and this I wrote to the treasurer and the minister for housing about this about a week ago, because for developers, if something expiring next October seems like a long time away. But if
Mm,
you're trying to buy a development site and
yes.
get the plans done and your planning approval and take it to the market, it takes more than a year.
Yeah.
So if you're relying on a government program that's expiring in less than a year, how do developers make their plans? So
Mm,
I think the government's well aware of this problem,
yeah.
and I reckon that they'll extend. I can't see with a rental crisis how they can let that come to an end.
Yeah.
But governments make surprisingly stupid decisions sometimes. So if you're worried about it, get out and buy before next October.
Sounds like a very good advice. And good on you
Yes.
for writing the letter to advocate for lots of the developer and the buyers as well, because investor or
Yeah.
buyers will benefit from it.
Yes.
50%
Well,
of
look,
stamp
we've
duty
been
rebate.
very strong advocates for the state government to remove the extra stamp duty for foreign buyers.
Yeah.
We've been pushing for that. But what you tend to find with governments in Australia is when they bring new taxes like that in,
Mhm.
their pride, it doesn't allow them to reverse course and remove it altogether. So instead of removing it, what they've done is given you a rebate, not only
Yeah.
of half the new stamp duty, but also half the old. So
Yeah.
it's a bit crazy, but that's how Australia rolls.
Good one. Yeah. And they increase the FIRB fee.
Ah, ah, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah,
What
look,
would,
these,
mm,
but again, that's not going to be reversed. So if anybody thinks that they doubled the FIRB fee and maybe they'll go back the other direction, no, it was a promise that the new federal Labor government made before the election, and I don't see them changing their mind.
yeah.
So what will happen in a lot of cases is that developers will end up having to absorb that extra cost, and they
Yes.
pass it on in the price to everybody.
Mm,
So Australians are going to pay part of that cost as well, and this is what
mm,
the government doesn't really understand. But the
mm,
50% stamp duty benefit is really important,
mm.
and costs and prices are only going to go up. So the longer people sit back and think about it, I think the more they're going to have to pay.
Now, with that, for a lot of our strategic investor, that small increase in fee or changes to them is probably not that concerning, because what they look at is the long-term gains. So they go
Mm.
into the the property market, they look at the long-term yield, because if you look at the last 100 or even 40 years of how Australia property perform, the price is going to keep going up anyhow. So, yeah, I think if,
Well, Leanne, Australia is one of the last countries in the world where the population can grow. We've got a very big land mass and a very, very small population. And if you
mm,
accept that population growth is important for property, then
yes,
Australia is one of the last countries that really can afford to bring in a much bigger population. And I think one of the issues that Australians concern themselves about is our defence. We've
yes,
got a beautiful country and we're used to being so free, and we want to remain free. And 25 million people can't defend a country of this size. And 25 million people can't pay for the roads and the hospitals. And so I think governments, both Labor and Liberal, are going to push for a bigger Australia.
yes,
So we're already the 10th biggest economy in the world now. And
correct.
I think I can see us going to 40, 50 million population over the next 20 years. I think we're going
Mm,
to continue to see quite strong growth. If you ask the average Aussie, they'd probably say they'd like it to stop and no more. But if you ask all the governments, they still talk about bigger population for this country.
correct. They actually have done this prediction already, isn't it? In the next 40 years, they're going to have lots more
Yes.
people coming in.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a lot more people coming. Yeah, a lot more people coming. And what Australia does always looks to attract young workers. So students to me are the ideal because they come here when they're young. We can teach them how to be good Australians, and they can come and join our workforce and pay taxes and have families. I think that's the best. They are the ideal migrants. So I think you can expect a lot more students to come in over the next 10, 20 years. It'll be a big industry here.
Yeah, and many people like to live in Australia as well. This is a country full of opportunities. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds great.
No, absolutely. I think none of that's going to change. I think Australians sometimes long for how things used to be, but the young people of this country are really enjoying how vibrant Australia has become. One of the things I noticed recently in the student stats is the third largest supplier of foreign students into Australia now is Nepal, which really surprised me. So China are obviously the largest, and then India, but very close third is Nepal. So obviously someone's doing a really good job of selling Australian universities into Nepal. But I think I've been to Nepal. It's a lovely, lovely country. It's very cold. Maybe they like our warm climate, but I suspect it's because there's unlimited work hours now for students.
Yes.
So young people from countries like Nepal can come to Australia and work while they put themselves through their studies. Is a really affordable way for them to do that. So to parents sending their kids here, if your kids are saying they can't find work, then they're just being lazy. Tell them to get out of the house and go look for a job. There's plenty.
Yeah, get some pocket money.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and Angus, when you mentioned about the education, in like couple of weeks ago, we did talk about a different pathway to come into Australia to study as well with another speaker. And yes, you are right. There's so many opportunity. You don't have to just go through university anymore. There's so many different pathway, colleges, and TAFE, that sort of avenue that people can come through and don't have to pay the very expensive uni fee, and still manage to get a very good skill or certificate to stay in Australia. So lots of opportunity to come through. Yeah.
And no, absolutely, Leanne. And look, I've got 5 kids between 27 and 37. Yeah, you can say I must be older than I look. That'd be nice. But they've all got good careers. They earn really good money. Some of them are in business. Some of them are working for other people. The opportunities for young people in Australia to get a good education, go into business or work for major companies. It's really a positive time. Young people complain that they get it hard, and old guys like me got it easy. But there's just great opportunities out there for young people in Australia for the next 10, 20, 30 years. I think really good times for young people.
Yeah, sounds good. So in quick summary, so good to understand that each state in Australia, we all perform very differently. So if you're looking to invest in particular city, it's good to speak to a local expert and find out how and why and what. And still a good time to buy, especially in Perth. And do not overstretch yourself. Plenty of opportunity out there still. Looking forward, we're going to have less stock in the market. Yep. Looks like that is the situation, isn't it? Yeah. So we still have good incentive from the WA government, 50% stamp duty rebate for our off-the-plan project. And student migrant is coming back. We need more properties. We need more investor. So it's all sounding very positive. Yeah. Is there one more extra advice that, Angus, you would like to share with our audience?
Right, now you've got me. I've given you everything that I know, Leanne. What more can I say?
I'm trying to squeeze more out from you.
Look, I just think that the really important thing is to find a trusted person that you can work with. If I was going and buying in Singapore or Malaysia, it'd be really hard unless I had a guide. I might make mistakes. So I would say, whatever you do, the first thing to do is find a trusted person that you can talk to, and then then you're in good hands. And we work with a lot of companies around Perth, and I wouldn't be on here unless I was a big supporter of IQI. Obviously, we're totally independent from you guys, but we've worked with you for a long time, and you've been very good people to work with. So I think that's an endorsement that all of your listeners can take for granted. Okay.
That is the best advice, Angus.
Absolutely.
Once again, thank you very much. So thank you so much for your time. And, throughout the last couple of years that we worked together, we learned so much from you as well. So, yeah, it's a win-win for us both. Yeah. Thank you.
All the best, Leanne, and all the best to your listeners.
Yep. Thank you. And everyone have a great evening. Yep. And have a great weekend.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Angus.